Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Riding of Yorkshire series. Together with the unparished city of Hull, it forms the county of the same name. There's 172 parishes here. Which one are we in today? Welcome back to the East Riding of Yorkshire, everybody. Now, as we've come to learn over the past couple of episodes, the East Riding is a very good place for pictures. It's a very picturesque part of the world. It's also a good place to do a little bit of artwork. These trees here were painted by a famous artist, and you'll find these in the parish of Warter. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Our last venture into the East Yorkshire Wolds for a while sees us take on Warter, a village which will tie together a few things we've learned in some recent episodes. Warter is situated approximately 4 miles east of Pocklington and 18 miles from the city of York on the B1246. It's an estate village whose origins can be traced back to the Middle Ages. The greater part of Warter was owned by the monks of Warter Priory, an Augustinian monastery that was established in 1132. The current church stands on the site of the former priory church. From around 1630, the Warter estate was owned by the Stapleton family, from whom it passed by marriage in the late 17th century to Sir William Pennington of Muncaster Castle. The Penningtons lived part of the year at Muncaster Castle, part in London and part at Warter Hall, known as Warter Priory, by 1840, a house they built a mile from the village. In later times, Charles Henry Wilson, the first Lord Nunbenome, owned the Warter estate. He was the Liberal MP for Hull and the owner of the biggest shipping line in the world. Much like Nunbenome, Warter's residents were heavily involved in farming, which is still a thing here, but the majority of the residents no longer work on the land. It's a tiny place with less than 200 residents, but there's a lot here, so let's go and check it all out. We start on the outskirts of the village on a minor road between the B1246 and the A614, just to the west of Middleton on the Wolds. I've come here to see these trees. These might not look like anything fantastic, although that didn't stop the Yorkshire artist David Hockney from painting them in 2007. Named Bigger Trees Near Warter, Hockney's work is a large landscape, measuring 180 by 480 inches, making it the largest painting he's ever completed. The painting has an alternative French title, which I'm not about to try and pronounce. It's in the caption at the bottom of the screen. It's a reference to the technique Hockney used to create the work, a combination of painting out of doors and in front of the subject, and using digital photography. Here's the piece, and I reckon it's a pretty good likeness. The painting is dominated by a large sycamore, which features in 30 of its 50 panels. Now, this is how close they are to Warter. 2 miles away from this junction. North Dalton's 3.5, Burnby's 5, Market Wheaton 6.5, and Middleton 3.5. We're interested, of course, today in water. So 2 miles that way. There's plenty in this little village. Let's go. Our main walk starts at Ludhill House, one of the largest houses in Warter, which stands opposite the village green and the War Memorial. The War Memorial takes the form of a large Celtic cross on a stone pedestal, which bears its names and an inscription in raised lettering. At the base of the cross there's a carving of St George and the dragon. Behind this we can see a lovely row of thatched cottages. This terrace was heightened and thatched by the Vesti family after they bought the Warter estate in 1929. It's one of the most photographed views in East Yorkshire. Long before that though, the vast majority of the village was rebuilt, mainly in the 1860s, which means most properties here have features typical of Victorian buildings. And our route will now take us away from the green down Warter's main street, Adalkeld, which is where we'll come across some of those properties. So if you're wondering why I haven't gone to the church yet, it's because that's further around our route. We will catch that later. For now, we're walking down here, and one of the landmarks along this road is a school, and I can hear the children in the background, so it must be playtime. Let's go and find that and see what else we can find down here. Warter used to have both Wesleyan and Primitive Methodist chapels. The Primitive chapel has now been demolished, but this is the former Wesleyan, which closed in 1974. It's now been converted into a private house. Speaking of houses, most here today are exactly as they were in Victorian times, only a handful were built after 1900. Here's the school. This is Warter Church of England Primary School. After Year 6, most of its pupils transfer to Woldgate College in Pocklington. The school now has 50% more pupils than it did 100 years ago. Warter has had at least 3 schools in its time, and we'll see an old one later. Barring this little shelter, the rest of Adalkeld is predominantly residential, with most houses having well-kept hedges and gardens. It's considered to be one of the prettiest villages in Yorkshire, attracting visitors in the same way today as it has for decades. It's certainly a village I would recommend living in. So the further you walk down here, the more the houses become a little bit more spaced out, a bit more sporadic. Eventually, at the end of this road, we turn to the right, and there'll be nothing on that road there. It'll be a bit barren as we head back towards the main road. This next section takes us back to the B1246 via Lares Lane, a narrow country road typical of the East Yorkshire Wolds. There's not a lot on this one though. Back to the main road, here's Skygate Farm, one of those which belongs to Warter Priory Farms. Another of those is Manor Farm. It's not long before we encounter Warter's old school, which dates from 1868. This replaced a modest thatch building on the corner of the village green. This school was much bigger, and it could hold 140 children. It would eventually be replaced with the modern school in 1976, catering for just 48 at that time. Next we come to Skygate Cottages, and you're looking at the post office here, which stands on the site of a former pub called the Creeping Kate. It was named after a racehorse owned by the Penningtons. In the wall we have a notable postbox. This one dates from the time of George VI. So we'll do the TVI Constitutional here. Here's a card going on the notice board. That is Warter done. Just close the board back up again. It took me all the time to work out how to open this one. There we go, done it. There we are. And also you've seen the postbox, and let's check out the bus information. So here you can catch the 45A, which goes to York Station Road. Goes via Pocklington, Barnby Moor, Wilberforce, Kexby, the University of York, Heworth, York Stonebow and York Station Road. Our next stop is the Church of St James, which was built in imitation of a 13th century Gothic style in 1862 and 63 for Jocelyn Francis Pennington. This is not used as a church any longer, rather it's the Wolds Heritage Centre, which showcases the life, history and heritage of the Warter estate and the Yorkshire Wolds. As a church though, it's thought that the present building is the third to occupy this site. It's situated on a high bank across the road from the village green. Among the Heritage Centre's features are two large half-circle stained glass windows saved from a demolished mausoleum to the Wilsons or the Lord Nunbenome family. And speaking of them, these fabulous bronze statues in the churchyard, signed by the sculptor Gilbert Bayes, commemorate the first Lord Nunbenome. The second Lord Nunbenome, also named Charles, is commemorated by this handsome Neo-Georgian tomb chest close by. And from the churchyard you can see the site of Warter's medieval priory. It's on private land, so we can't go onto this, but we can still get a really good view of the earthworks. And what earthworks! There's a big dip in the middle there, a nice ridge on this side here, very well pronounced. Loving that. Here's a bit more information about the priory. This is the site of Warter's medieval priory, a former Augustinian priory dedicated to St James, founded in 1132 by Geoffrey Fitz-Payne. The chronicler, Stephen Ayton, was a canon here. The prior and canons were granted the right to host a fair on the Feast of St James here, which fell on July the 25th. That was until Edward III closed the event in 1328 due to a number of murders. Like so many other priories, Henry VIII dissolved Warter Priory in the 1530s. Earthworks are all that remain of the medieval priory now. This is quite an extensive site where all the monastic buildings would have once stood. The medieval priory is not to be confused with the much more modern house of the same name, built by the Penningtons in the late 17th century. Originally named Warter Hall, it was renamed to Warter Priory following extensive Victorian redevelopment. The house stood 1 mile to the southwest of the village. To many locals, Warter Priory was known as the Big House. It no longer stands as it was demolished in 1972 and its rubble filled in a lake within its gardens. The mansion dominated the life of the village. In fact, Warter was effectively an extension of the Great House and Park to all intents and purposes. It was the home of Lord Nunbenome, as we've already discussed, but also his wife, the formidable Lady Nunbenome, known to a lot of locals as the Boss. Born in London in 1854, Florence Jane Helen Wellesley was the eldest daughter of Colonel William Henry Charles Wellesley, a nephew of the Duke of Wellington. She married Charles Wilson in 1871 and they lived in Cottingham near Hull before moving to Warter Priory. From the purchase of the Warter estate by her husband in 1878 until its sale over 50 years later, the lives of the villagers were dominated by this one woman, and you didn't dare get in her way. Now there is one more thing I haven't covered here in Warter, and I will go to it shortly, but first of all you guys need the rest of section, and I'll meet you there in a moment. So when I drove into the village earlier, from where the trees are located, the David Hockney trees I'm going to call them, I passed this pond. and I didn't realise that Warter even had a pond, but it does apparently. Very frozen over at the moment. I actually think this is some kind of dam, because over the road there's another body of water which seems to flow underneath this road from this little culvert here and out into this little lake where there's plenty of wildlife at the moment. I say little lake, it's actually quite a large lake. It goes for quite a long way. In fact, I might walk down there in a moment and see just how far it does go. It seems to go a long way back. But yeah, plenty of ducks and geese and other feathered friends enjoying the water and the ice and snow, I suppose. If they do enjoy that, I don't know whether they do. I'm not a duck, so I can't tell you. Anyway, that's been the parish of Warter here in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and it's time for me to move on to my next one. And I don't know where that's going to be yet, but I think it's probably going to be closer to Hull. So we'll get off the East Yorkshire Wolds again and go somewhere a little bit more urban. I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot. This has been the parish of Warter, and I'm out.